Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. Av. I never imagined that money could dictate identity, or that an inheritance could come with strings so strange, so unnerving, that it would shake the foundations of who I thought I was. It started on a rainy morning when the lawyer called me to his office. His expression was formal, precise, as if he were delivering a verdict instead of a simple message. "Your late aunt left a condition in her will," he said, sliding a thick envelope across the polished oak table. "To claim your inheritance, you must live as a lady for a full month. No exceptions." I laughed at first, thinking it was some cruel joke. But the seriousness in his eyes told me otherwise. I read the will myself later that evening. Precise instructions outlining attire, behavior, and social conduct. There were even stipulations for posture, etiquette, and public appearances. Any deviation, the document warned, would forfeit my inheritance entirely. I didn't want to do it. I was comfortable in my life, my clothes, my habits. Yet the sum involved, a fortune that could change my life completely, loomed in my mind like a bright, blinding temptation. By the time I left the lawyer's office, my mind was a storm of resistance and curiosity, fear and excitement tangled together in a mess I didn't know how to unravel. The first day of transformation began with an unexpected delivery, a wardrobe. Dresses of every shade, delicate blouses, skirts, gloves, and shoes, all meticulously chosen. A stylist had also been hired, someone who would train me in the ways of posture, walking, and social comportment. She was kind but firm, her gaze sharp as she assessed my awkward stance and untamed hands. "This isn't just about clothes," she said, almost sternly. "It's about becoming her, or, at least, the version of yourself that she would approve of." I changed into my first outfit, a soft, cream-colored dress that felt foreign against my skin. The skirt brushed my knees in a way that made me hyper-aware of every movement. I struggled to adjust my posture, straighten my back, and walk without looking stiff or awkward. Mirrors lined the room, and I caught glimpses of myself that felt almost alien. The reflection staring back wasn't quite me. The curve of the waist, the tilt of the head, the delicate shape of the hands, I barely recognized it. Hours passed in drills, walking gracefully, carrying myself lightly, and even practicing polite smiles in the mirror. Each repetition made me more aware of how different my body felt when I inhabited this new persona. There was frustration, yes, but also a creeping fascination. Could I really transform in this way? Could a month of strict rules, clothing, and observation reshape not just my movements, but the essence of how I carried myself? Dinner was my first real test. I had to sit with the other heirs, maintaining composure while engaging in polite conversation. Each glance from the group felt magnified, like tiny judgments I could sense even if I didn't hear them. My hands shook slightly as I held the fork, my voice softened in ways I hadn't consciously chosen. And yet, there was a thrill in performing, in inhabiting this new self, in seeing how others reacted to a version of me I was only beginning to understand. That night, as I lay in bed in the unfamiliar softness of the dress and the weight of the day pressing down, I realized something profound. The inheritance wasn't just about wealth. It was about transformation, self-awareness, and discovery. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was already beginning to see changes, not only in appearance but in posture, in movement, and, unexpectedly, in confidence. The next morning, I woke with a strange mix of dread and curiosity. I could feel the fabric of the dress from the previous day still clinging faintly to my skin, a subtle reminder that my life had already begun to shift. The wardrobe for the month had been delivered to my room, a curated collection that seemed designed to overwhelm. Silks, chiffons, skirts, blouses, gloves, each piece delicate, precise, and entirely foreign. I ran my fingers over the folds, feeling a mix of awe and hesitation. The stylist arrived promptly, her presence commanding yet calm. "Today," she said, "we focus on refinement. Grace isn't just in posture, it's in how you inhabit your body. If you fail to embody it fully, the inheritance slips away." The words hit harder than I expected. This wasn't a mere exercise. This was a test of identity, discipline, and adaptability. She began with my posture. I had to stand for minutes at a time, adjusting shoulders, tilting my chin, aligning my spine. It was exhausting and uncomfortable. My body, trained for casual ease, resisted the deliberate elegance she demanded. I stumbled, wobbled, and cursed silently, yet each correction felt like a small victory. Gradually, I began to notice a shift, not dramatic, but undeniable. My body felt taller, more deliberate. Movements that had been clumsy or unconscious now carried a rhythm, a subtle grace I had never possessed. By mid-morning, she introduced walking lessons. I had to navigate hallways, stairs, and uneven floors in delicate shoes, the skirts brushing my legs just so. Every step was measured. Every glance, every turn, had to convey poise. I tripped more than once, my cheeks burning in frustration, but I also felt a strange thrill in the act itself. It wasn't just about obedience, it was about discovery. The way my body responded, the small sensations of elegance, the subtle awareness of how I occupied space, it was unfamiliar and intoxicating. Lunch was quieter. I practiced using utensils with refined gestures, holding a cup with measured fingers, and even learning how to maintain a composed posture while seated. The other heirs observed me with polite curiosity, whispers that carried only faintly across the table. I couldn't ignore the awareness of being watched. Every tiny movement felt scrutinized. And yet, for the first time, I felt a flicker of pride, not arrogance, but the delicate satisfaction of someone beginning to master a challenge that once seemed impossible. The afternoon introduced etiquette drills. I had to write thank you notes, practice polite conversation, and even learn the subtle art of curtsies and head tilts. Each repetition, each small correction, built something I couldn't yet fully name. It wasn't just skill, it was awareness. My reflection in the mirror during these exercises was both comforting and jarring. I recognized my face, yet it seemed softer, more deliberate, more aligned with the persona I was being asked to embody. By evening, exhaustion had set in, but there was a strange sense of satisfaction. The first day of rigorous training had stripped away a layer of familiarity, forcing me into something entirely new. And yet, beneath the fatigue, a thrill lingered. I could feel change happening, subtle but undeniable. The dress, the posture, the careful movements, they weren't just external rules. They were shaping how I perceived myself, how I understood my presence in the world. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized the truth. The inheritance was never just about money. It was about forcing me to confront an unfamiliar version of myself, to step into someone entirely different, and to discover what I was capable of under pressure, scrutiny, and expectation. The journey had begun, and I couldn't predict where it would end, but I knew, with a mix of apprehension and anticipation, that it was already changing me. The third day began with an unsettling sense of rhythm. The initial shock of the wardrobe, the strict rules, the constant observation, had faded just enough for me to notice subtle changes in myself. My body was beginning to respond differently. My back straightened instinctively, my hands rested lightly at my sides, my steps carried a cautious grace I hadn't possessed before. It was unnerving and exhilarating all at once. The stylist was in my room early, clipboard in hand. "Today, we focus on presentation," she said. "Every detail matters. The tilt of your chin, the angle of your wrist, the way your eyes meet another's. By the end of the day, you should be able to walk into a room and command attention without speaking." I swallowed hard. The task sounded impossible, but there was no room for hesitation. The inheritance depended on it. We began with mirrors. I spent hours practicing expressions, angles, and gestures. The reflection that stared back at me was both familiar and foreign. My jawline seemed softer, my shoulders smaller, my hands delicate in a way I had never noticed. I found myself tracing the lines of my face unconsciously, realizing that these small, forced movements were shaping not just perception, but my own awareness. The stylist corrected me repeatedly, her voice firm but encouraging. Every adjustment, Every subtle change etched a new layer of identity into my being. Lunch was a small group gathering with the other heirs. I had to maintain composure while engaging in light conversation, presenting myself as the poised lady I was learning to become. Every gesture, every word, every glance was scrutinized, not only by them, but by the invisible weight of expectation. I felt a strange tension. My body was learning elegance. My mind was aware of the transformation, and yet I couldn't ignore a flicker of resistance. This wasn't me, or at least it wasn't entirely me. And yet, I couldn't deny the thrill of discovering what I could become. The afternoon introduced social drills. I practiced tea service, curtsies, and measured conversation. Each repetition was exhausting but strangely meditative. I noticed the way my hands moved, the way my weight shifted, the tiny adjustments that created a rhythm of refinement. The stylist watched silently, occasionally stepping in to correct a tilt or a gesture. Each correction was a reminder that perfection wasn't the goal, embodiment was. I had to inhabit this persona fully, internalize it until it felt natural, or at least natural enough to convince everyone else. By evening, the exhaustion was physical and mental. My muscles ached from unfamiliar positions, my feet protested against delicate shoes, and yet my mind buzzed with fascination. I caught myself practicing a subtle smile in the mirror before dinner, noting how the curve of my lips softened my expression. The reflection was no longer alien. It was evolving into a version of myself I hadn't dared imagine. Grace wasn't just in clothing or posture. It was in presence, awareness, and intention. Before bed, I walked slowly through the hallways, each footstep measured, each gesture deliberate. I imagined the eyes of my late aunt observing me from somewhere, testing, judging, expecting. And in that imagination, I felt a strange connection, an understanding that this month wasn't merely a test, but a gift. It forced me to confront myself, to examine habits, gestures, and presence in ways I never had before. I was changing, perhaps unwillingly, perhaps under pressure, but undeniably. As I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt a thrill of both apprehension and anticipation. The inheritance was no longer a prize, it was a journey. And each day, each strict rule, each forced lesson in poise and composure was carving a new version of me, someone elegant, aware, deliberate, and quietly powerful. I didn't know who I would be at the end of the month, but I could feel the transformation taking root, slow and deliberate, in ways I couldn't yet fully grasp. The fourth day began with a quiet intensity. I woke before sunrise, the soft light of morning filtering through the curtains, and realized I had begun to anticipate the routines instead of resisting them. The uniform dresses, once foreign and suffocating, now clung to me with a strange familiarity. My movements were still deliberate, still careful, but the awkwardness that had dominated the first days was fading. The stylist arrived early, her expression unreadable. "Today," she said, "we focus on social presence. Grace is meaningless without confidence." She led me to a large parlor where I was to practice hosting a small tea gathering. My heart raced as I set out delicate cups and plates, arranging everything perfectly. Every tilt of the cup, every step between tables, every gesture with the napkin was magnified in my mind. I couldn't afford a single misstep. As the other heirs arrived, I realized how much had already changed. I moved with a deliberate elegance, my hands steady, my posture upright, my voice soft but clear. I noticed their expressions subtly shifting, some curiosity, some admiration, none of the earlier amusement or skepticism. And for the first time, I felt the thrill of control, not dominance, but the quiet power of presence. My identity was slowly merging with the persona I had been forced to adopt. After the gathering, the stylist took me aside. "Notice how your movements are more natural," she said. "The uniform, the routines, they are shaping your body, but your awareness is shaping your mind. You are learning to inhabit yourself differently." I nodded, realizing she was right. I could feel a shift not just in how I looked, but in how I sensed myself, how I carried weight, how I moved through space. The transformation wasn't superficial, it was becoming internalized. The afternoon brought more challenges: writing formal letters, practicing delicate hand movements, learning subtle expressions to convey politeness or interest. Each task required focus, yet I began to notice a strange pleasure in repetition. There was satisfaction in precision, a kind of quiet pride in mastering the nuances of gesture, posture, and presence. My reflection in the mirror became increasingly familiar, even comforting. The face staring back at me was no longer foreign. It was a careful blend of me and the persona I was learning to embody. But with growth came unease. I caught myself pausing at mirrors and hallways, studying my reflection for minutes at a time. Was this still me, or had I become something else entirely? The thought unsettled me, but it also fascinated me. The inheritance demanded change, and I was changing, but there was a subtle joy in discovering new capabilities, new poise, new awareness of myself that had been dormant for years. By evening, the house had quieted. I wandered slowly through the hallways, the polished floors reflecting both light and my silhouette. The subtle sway of my skirt, the delicate tilt of my head, the carefully measured rhythm of my steps, it all felt right, in a way I couldn't have imagined just days ago. I was becoming someone both unfamiliar and intimately known, and the thought was exhilarating and frightening in equal measure. Lying in bed that night, I realized the inheritance was no longer just about money. It was about transformation, discovery, and identity. Each challenge, each forced lesson, each reflection in the mirror was reshaping not just my appearance, but my awareness, my presence, and my understanding of myself. And for the first time, I wondered if the person I was becoming, the lady I was forced to embody, might be someone I would never want to let go of, even when the inheritance was secured. The fifth morning carried a weight I hadn't expected. I woke with the sense that the month wasn't just shaping my appearance, but testing my very perception of self. The dresses, shoes, and gloves that had once felt foreign now seemed almost like extensions of my body, and yet each movement still required conscious attention. I was no longer fumbling blindly, but the awareness of observation, of scrutiny, remained a constant companion. The stylist arrived with a determined look. "Today," she said, "we focus on presence under pressure. Elegance is meaningless if it falters when others watch. You will host a formal luncheon, attended by extended family and select friends." My stomach tightened. The idea of performing before an audience, the invisible expectation of perfection, was daunting. And yet, there was a strange thrill in it, the knowledge that I was being shaped into someone deliberate, poised, and entirely observable. I spent the morning rehearsing. Every step across the floorboards was measured, every gesture calculated but fluid, every glance timed perfectly. I adjusted my skirt, smoothed my hair, practiced a gentle smile. Mirrors lined the hallways, reflecting not just my image, but the awareness of the scrutiny I would face. I caught myself pausing, studying the tilt of my head, the arc of my eyebrows, the subtle relaxation of my shoulders. It was exhausting, meticulous work, but I felt something growing inside me, a quiet confidence, a sense that I could inhabit this persona fully. When the luncheon began, my nerves were a roaring tide. The guests observed quietly, their expressions polite but evaluating. My first few steps across the dining room felt heavy, almost unnatural, but then something shifted. Muscle memory, awareness, and repetition converged. My steps became fluid, gestures elegant, my voice calm and measured. I realized with a jolt that I wasn't just performing. I was inhabiting this version of myself in a way that felt deliberate, real, and undeniably powerful. After the luncheon, the stylist pulled me aside. "Notice," she said, "how the confidence grows when you trust the training. Elegance isn't just learned, it's internalized. It becomes who you are." I nodded, a strange warmth spreading through me. I could feel her words settling inside me. I wasn't just wearing the clothes or following rules. I was discovering a version of myself that had been dormant, a self that moved through the world with precision, awareness, and a quiet strength. The afternoon brought reflective exercises, practicing sitting gracefully, walking through narrow corridors, maintaining composure under scrutiny. Each repetition reinforced the transformation. My reflection in the mirrors became familiar, reassuring even. I began to see not just a forced persona, but an integrated self, a balance of who I had been and who I was being asked to become. The process was no longer alien or humiliating. It was shaping me, carefully and irrevocably. By evening, the exhaustion was palpable. My muscles ached, but there was exhilaration, a quiet thrill in the awareness of change. I wandered through the halls, observing how the light caught the curves of the dresses, the sway of the skirt, the poise in my stance. The reflection of myself in the polished floors and mirrors was no longer alarming. It was powerful. I realized that the inheritance, the rules, the expectations had forced me to confront not only how I appeared, but how I moved, how I was perceived, and ultimately, how I perceived myself. That night, as I lay in bed, I understood something profound. The inheritance was never merely about wealth. It was about transformation, self-discovery, and the quiet shaping of identity. The forced lessons, the scrutiny, and the meticulously imposed elegance were molding me into someone entirely new. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a growing acceptance, perhaps even pride, in the self I was becoming, a self I hadn't imagined, but one I was beginning to trust. The sixth day began with a weighty quiet that felt almost sacred. I woke earlier than usual, the soft morning light filtering through my curtains, and I realized I no longer felt the same shock or resistance I had in the beginning. The dresses, the gloves, the carefully arranged shoes, they no longer felt foreign or burdensome. Instead, they seemed like extensions of my body, natural components of this transformed self I had been slowly discovering. The stylist arrived, her expression serious. "Today will challenge your presence in public," she said. "Elegance and composure must not waver, even under observation or unexpected scrutiny." I nodded, my stomach tightening. Today wasn't just about practice, it was about proof. I would step into spaces where others could evaluate, judge, and respond, and I had to hold my persona fully, without hesitation. We began with walking drills across the main hallway, navigating obstacles like furniture, steps, and subtle distractions. Every step required balance, awareness, and precision. The heels, once clumsy and heavy, now clicked softly beneath me, each stride deliberate. Mirrors lined the hall, reflecting not just my image, but the awareness of observation. For the first time, I caught myself moving almost instinctively, the awkward tension of the first days replaced by a quiet, deliberate rhythm. Mid-morning brought a new challenge, social interaction with a small group of guests arriving unexpectedly. I was tasked with greeting them, offering tea, and engaging in polite conversation, all while maintaining posture, expression, and composure. My hands were steady, my voice soft yet confident, my gaze deliberate. The first few moments were tense, every gesture conscious, but soon I realized I wasn't acting as much as I was inhabiting this new identity. The reflection of myself in the eyes of the guests and in fleeting mirrors along the hall revealed someone entirely new, a poised, aware, and deliberate presence. Afternoon exercises, focused on refinement. I practiced holding a book, arranging delicate objects, and walking across the room with multiple items in hand, all without breaking composure. Each repetition was tiring, but it also reinforced subtle awareness. I noticed how my shoulders aligned, how my hands moved, how my steps conveyed intention. These weren't merely movements, they were statements of self, quiet but unmistakable. The stylist observed, offering small corrections that, when applied, felt transformative. By evening, exhaustion was paired with exhilaration. My body ached from unfamiliar posture and precise gestures, yet my mind buzzed with fascination. The mirror had become a confidant rather than a critic. I studied my reflection, noticing how my shoulders now rested naturally, how my stance suggested calm and poise, how my expression carried a subtle awareness that had been impossible before. I realized then that the inheritance had become secondary. The transformation itself had become the real reward. Lying in bed that night, I reflected on the month. Every rule, every correction, every careful movement had brought me closer to a self I hadn't known existed. The forced lessons, the scrutiny, the meticulous expectations, they weren't just shaping my appearance, they were reshaping my awareness, my presence, and my confidence. I understood now that this experience had demanded more than mere compliance. It had demanded attention, patience, discipline, and courage. And in that quiet realization, I felt a surge of quiet triumph, a recognition that I had faced the challenge fully and discovered strength I hadn't imagined. Sleep came slowly as I traced the edges of my reflection in my mind, aware that tomorrow, the final day, would ask me to embody everything I had learned, fully and publicly. The culmination of forced transformation, the month-long inheritance challenge, and my evolving identity all hung in delicate balance. And deep inside, I felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a strange, thrilling pride in the self I was about to reveal. The seventh morning arrived with a quiet intensity that I could almost feel pressing in from the walls around me. I woke early, the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, and for the first time, I felt fully aware of how far I had come. The dresses, the shoes, the carefully maintained posture, they no longer felt like a burden or a disguise. They felt like extensions of me, deliberate tools I had learned to inhabit with precision, grace, and awareness. The stylist arrived with a knowing look. "Today is the culmination," she said. "All that you have practiced, all that you have learned, will be revealed. You will inhabit this self fully, without hesitation or doubt." My stomach tightened. Today wasn't just practice. Today was proof of discipline, of transformation, and of the new awareness I had cultivated over the past 6 days. The first task was a formal introduction to the family and the legal representatives overseeing the inheritance. I entered the drawing room with measured steps, my posture upright, my hands lightly folded in front of me. Every movement felt deliberate, every gesture precise. I noticed small details, how the light caught the folds of my dress, how my reflection shimmered briefly in the polished surfaces, how my presence subtly commanded attention without a word. I could feel the transformation in my very bones. Each careful step, each tilt of the head, each controlled gesture was proof of the month-long journey. The family and representatives observed me with polite curiosity. Their expressions, once faintly skeptical, now carried recognition and subtle admiration. I spoke softly, clearly, and deliberately, responding with grace to questions and gestures. For the first time, I felt the thrill of inhabiting this new self completely, not performing, but existing fully within a persona that had been forced upon me, yet now felt undeniably my own. After the formalities, the stylist asked me to spend a moment alone in the parlor. I stood in front of the grand mirror that reflected the room in its entirety. I studied my reflection carefully. The woman staring back at me was not exactly who I had been, but she was me. The posture, the gestures, the elegance, they were not just forced or superficial. They had merged with my awareness, my presence, and my confidence. I had faced the challenge, endured the discipline, and discovered a side of myself I hadn't known existed. Evening arrived quietly, and with it the final note: the inheritance is yours. But more importantly, you have discovered who you are capable of being. Holding the note, I realized that the wealth was secondary. The true reward had been the transformation itself. The months of observation, the meticulous practice, the scrutiny, and the repeated challenges had reshaped not just my appearance, but my awareness, my confidence, and my presence in the world. As I walked through the quiet halls one last time, I noticed details I had missed before. The way my footsteps sounded, the subtle sway of my skirt, the gentle tilt of my head. Each movement was deliberate, elegant, and entirely my own. I understood that the journey wasn't over. Transformation, once begun, continues beyond the rules, beyond the uniforms, beyond the tests. But for the first time, I felt ready to carry it forward consciously, aware of the strength, grace, and poise I had cultivated. Lying in bed that night, I traced the reflection of my journey in my mind, from hesitant first steps to deliberate, confident presence. The inheritance, the rules, the forced lessons, they had all brought me to this moment. And now, I was not just the person I had been, nor the persona I had been asked to embody. I was a combination of both, a self-aware, deliberate, and quietly powerful. I closed my eyes, feeling a profound sense of completion, anticipation, and acceptance. I had been forced to be a lady, but in the process, I had discovered a version of myself I would never forget.